Hello, my name is Donna DeStefano, and today I am here interviewing Sandi Klink for the ADA in Tennessee Oral History Project. The date is April 30th, 2025, and Sandi is in Memphis, and I am in Nashville, both in the state of Tennessee. Sandi, I'm really happy that you are here. The major goal of this project is to contribute to a historical understanding of the disability experience and the ADA in Tennessee. So let's get started. Sandi, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. I am a person with a significant disability. I grew up in Tennessee and acquired my disability at age 4. When I joined Disability World, I was about 17 because I didn't know up till then that I was any different than anybody else. When I acquired my disability and joined Disability World, I it was before the ADA, considerably. I guess that was probably in the 60s, and there were a lot of things going on in the 60s, but, I have was not really a part of that kinda thing. I was, a sweet little, cute little, tiny little girl, who walked with a little bit of a limp, but got done what needed to get done.
Great. Thanks, Sandi. So, do you think that the ADA has made a difference in your personal life? And if so, in what ways? Because you've talked about the fact that you were born before the ADA, and so I'm sure that you've seen things pre and post the ADA coming into effect.
Yes, the ADA made huge strides for many of us. Um, I took my first job in disability world in the 80s and met an incredible woman who was fighting for her rights and the rights of others. Her name was Deborah Cunningham, and she taught me so many things that I had been unaware of, really. Um, I had gotten my first job on my own, but just because I could write well. And she taught me that there were a lot of people out there that weren't getting employed at all because of their disabilities. And I was like, why? And she said they just weren't being given a chance. I've seen so many of our young people that joined Disability Connection after the ADA that didn't realize it either. Really, they had grown up after the 504 was passed. They got a pretty typical education and they came up expecting to work, and they did. And that was just so fabulous that these folks were being given a chance to show their stuff, and we helped them do that. And I remember the marches, and I remember fighting for those rights. And my first job outside of nonprofit world, they were gonna give me a chance because they thought they were gonna be required to hire people with disabilities. Um, so here was this person that was basically thrown in their lap by a employer who was working with people with disabilities, employment agency. And so they made me go through all the tests and everything like that. And quite frankly, they were amazed. I scored very high on their test. especially for a person who'd never been to college. So I worked for them for about 3.5 years, and then had to leave for disability issues, health issues that kind of jumped on me badly. And so I had to leave for a while. But after that, I went to work for a temp agency. They never thought a thing about my disability. They just sent me out to do work, and I did it.
Wow. Thank you. That's great. You talked about what the first employer being amazed. How did they express that? What did they do?
Well, there was a lot of oversight in the first couple of months, and they had expected to have to do a whole lot of extra training and that kind of thing. And I got ended up just having the typical few weeks training like anybody before, and dove right into it. And I even had the general manager come by and uh, kind of look at Brenda and look at me, and she'd give me a thumbs up, and he would go, "So glad you're here, and if you need anything, please let me know." Kind of, do you
Okay.
need special parking? Do you need this? Do you need that? And even in those days, I wasn't using a chair full time. And so I just used my manual chair part time. And so they knew on days when I rolled in that I wasn't feeling particularly chipper. But I came to work, I did my job, and I showed them that people with disabilities worked twice as hard to maintain what they needed because they weren't given a chance. So once they had one, they made it shine.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very helpful to know. So it seems like it wasn't really said that there was just sort of a coming by, looking at you, making sure that you were okay. Is that how it
Yes.
was? Okay, great,
You
good.
don't see the general manager coming by very often to check on a new employee.
Right.
So it was kind of their way of making sure that the team was okay and that I was in a good spot and that kind of thing.
Good, good. Thank you. And then the subsequent employer really didn't have that kind of oversight, it seems.
The next employer were temp agencies. And as long as I went to the job, did what I was supposed to, they were ecstatic. So they never cared about my disability. It was not ever really brought up. They followed the rules of the ADA. And I was receptionist, I was secretary, I was um, an administrative assistant. Did a little bit of everything, had two different employers want to hire me full time. And I said, I can't work full time. And I appreciate your faith in me. But I just can't physically do full time work yet. Of course, when Deborah called me, it was a whole different thing.
So you went to work for Deborah
Yes, twice.
twice. Okay. So can you tell us a little bit about that and the experiences that you had there and related to the ADA making a difference or not?
Well, when I met Deborah, mid late 80s, the ADA was not law. There were a lot of protests going on. There were a lot of work being done on the sidelines and letters and et cetera, being happening. I went on my first march. It was against APTA in the late 80s.
Can
And
you can you can you tell us what APTA is?
okay, it's the American Public Transit Association. And currently, I know a little bit about more about APTA than I ever had before. But in those days, I don't know. I just knew that we wanted to be able to get on the bus. It was not a matter of where we sat on the bus. It was just in those days, we couldn't even get on the bus. They would give us a little paratransit occasionally, little buses, but as far as going out and getting on the fixed route and just going 5 miles down the road on fixed route, we couldn't get on it. We had to schedule paratransit. So I took part in my very first march in the late 80s against APTA, who were meeting here in Memphis. They were having one of their conferences here. And knowing Deborah, we were going to let them know that people with disabilities were not pleased with not being able to get on the bus. I did not take part in the further action. I took part in the march, but the action part of it, I was not ready for. They took the doors at the Peabody and protested for the day, and there were threat of arrest, but none were made. And so that was a little bit beyond me. Said I've got 2 children. I'm still fighting with my ex-husband over custody. I cannot get in trouble. So she understood that. And then when I went to work for her second time, I had to go on an adapt action. But the first time, um, I was her secretary and her transcriptionist. She needed somebody that could take her tapes and put them on our forms that we used for our consumer actions, consumer work and services, and know where to put what and figure all that out and type her letters and sometimes type the boss's letters and just had made myself quite at home. The agency was only 2 or 3 years old. We were still working on policies and procedures and early committees. I worked with some fabulous people in those days, Fred Dinwiddie, Lewis Patrick. They were all part of the early crew that had moved over from Easter Seals when the center first began. And I had the privilege of working on policies and procedures and working with those guys to make sure that they were understandable yet complied with the laws and things like that that I learned by looking them up. Old-fashioned ways, going to the library or there were all those wonderful things about looking things up on the internet.
Right, right. So you would have to, get out and go to the library. And how accessible was the library for you?
It was pretty good. They had really thought ahead and had quite a few folks that used their services that had disabilities. And so they at least had a ramp, and they were always willing, all the front desk people were always willing to help pull things if they were out of my distance. Yeah, because even without my chair, I was a little bitty thing. There were a lot of books and things like that above my head. But got to know a few folks at the library as well as in the workplace. And we learned together about what our needs were, and worked with some of the other nonprofits in the city. And uh, I met Carlene Leeper from Arc Mid South back in the beginning. And then I met Carol in the early days too. And it's been a wild ride in Tennessee, but it's been fun. We've done a lot of things, some through legislation and some through protest and some through actions. And so we've had, I went to Washington many times in the first few years, trying to make sure that the ADA was solid, and that some of the things weren't taken away. Um, and some of the things that we wanted in the ADA that had not been included, such as home and community-based services. We continued to work and fight for that. We still are. But with the new cuts coming, it's just ridiculous. We have to go back to 30 years ago and start over. But that's what advocates are for, right?
That's right. Those are definitely the threats and stuff. So when you first went to Washington, was that the second time that you were employed by what was the Memphis Center for Independent Living? Um, and can you talk a little bit about what kinds of things that you did once you got to Washington?
The first time I went to Washington representing the center was in 2000. And it was the 10th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And we had uh, a torch relay come through the United States celebrating that fact. And Memphis was the only city in Tennessee that the torch came through. And I was fortunate enough to work on that team, and as a contractor, and worked with Judy Neal and Tim Wheat and Deborah and others, and helped plan and put that all together. I recruited volunteers to carry the torch. I set out a map of different sites where the torch would be passed. And because of that work that we had done here in Memphis, we were invited to represent in DC. We were invited to participate in the march, which finalized the torch at the Capitol. And we also were invited to a party at the vice president's home as a way of thanking those volunteers. And I met Tipper Gore and her husband and other celebrities in my mind. And my one of the greatest memories I've ever had of that particular trip was having the opportunity to meet Justin Dart. Not only to shake his hand, but to have a few minutes to talk with him. And that starstruck Sandy in 2000. If I'd met some Broadway or Hollywood star would have been okay, but nothing beat an advocate meeting her hero because he made it happen. And so I met Justin that trip, and another trip I met Senator Harkin. And so those just having the opportunity to talk to those two guys and really know that I was sitting in grandeur. It was just fabulous. And just good old boys. Both of them were really just good old boys, but they were so down to earth and so sincere about caring for no, for everybody, just everybody, and wanting justice for all of us. That something that I will never have again, but something that I'm honored to say I met Justin Dart. Of course, I met Yoshiko several other times after that, but that just that was so meaningful to me. That gave me even more determination that I was going to continue to fight for this law and for the justice that we all deserved. So
Mm.
I have.
Thank you. That's great. That had to have been really something to meet those guys because they're the ones that helped to get the ADA through. So
Mhm.
yeah, thanks. That's amazing. So that was the first time you went to DC, right?
Yes.
And so roughly how many other times have you been to DC and what have you done?
Most of the rest of the times I was in DC were for adapt actions. I did go to uh, a couple of conferences with Nickel, which is the National Council on Independent Living. So I went to a couple of Nickel conferences uh, that we combined usually around the 4th of July and used July as the month that we celebrated independence. And several of our adapt actions would either follow or be right around that time too. And we would go to our legislators and go, we got lots of states that are not compliant. They're not doing their thing. They're not even beginning to make um, offices and courthouses and other things uh, ADA compliant, which led to some division among the ranks because of the court case uh, against the courts of Tennessee. And everyone got really nervous about that one because we were afraid that it would go against us and that we'd have to start all over again. Luckily, it didn't. And Tennessee was smacked on the hand and told, you will comply with the ADA and you better get your courthouses accessible. That was a little
Yeah.
scary, but it was kind of fun. Um,
Yes, and that was the Lane and Jones
yes.
case that went to the Supreme Court.
Hmm.
Went all the way up through the ranks of the judicial system. Yes, and lots of advocates and activists were holding their breath over that one, and it came back at a 5-4 decision
Yes.
favoring the plaintiffs in the case that had been discriminated against because of their disabilities. Um, we're into your advocacy and activism stage full on, and you had talked about adapt, and I know I'm going back a little bit, but adapt was a formidable group. Can you just talk a little bit about who ADAPT was and what the mission was, and then maybe describe a couple of the actions or one of the actions that you were involved in.
ADAPT started out as for accessible public transit for all. And they began basically in Denver, Colorado, protesting the inaccessible buses. And they were led by a man named Wade Blank. And Wade didn't have a disability, but he had worked in nursing homes and had seen some of the horrors in nursing homes, and some of the kids that were, as soon as they were aging out, were being put in nursing homes because they didn't have any services or supports. So he began not only Atlantis community in Denver, where he opened uh, basically a community apartment building with services and supports, and moved out some of those young people from the nursing home that he'd been fired from because he would take the kids out for activities such as to a rock concert and other things like that. And so that kind of got him in trouble for taking those youngins off campus and making them aware of a life outside of the nursing home. Um, Wade took ADAPT to the streets of Denver, and they were all adults with disabilities who wanted a real life. So they hit the streets, they blocked buses, they blocked intersections, they protested, they marched, they sat in, and they they did APTA and other conferences where they blocked doorways and chanted and uh, caused a little mayhem. nothing, nothing violent. They were protesting in the ways of Dr. King, and it was all nonviolent protest. Um, and they weren't afraid to go to jail, but it was interesting for the cops to take them to jail.
Can you describe that?
Not personally, but I did know Deborah Cunningham was proud of every arrest she ever had, and talked about one where she was taken to jail for a couple of days, and they had to, the jail had to figure out personal attendance services because they never arrested anybody like her before.
Because Deborah had some physical
Oh,
disabilities.
yes, Deborah
Because
was a quadriplegic. She had been affected by polio as a little bitty, itty bitty, and spent much of her first few years in an iron lung, and had some subsequent breathing issues once she got out of the iron lung, but her lungs did improve to a point where she didn't need a vent until her later years. But she used a power wheelchair from the time they were invented almost, and used whatever devices were up and coming and figured out ways to make things work. And she went to college. She got her master's in counseling, and she was a very strong advocate. And I must admit, the first time I ever met her, I was scared to death. I was this little bitty shy girl that had come out of a not so great marriage and was trying to build some self esteem. And here was this woman in all this contraption. and I'd never met anybody with that extent of a disability, and I was just like, and the power that she just emanated. She was just strong and self-empowered and, feminist and just so much larger than life that when she talked about her arrest and stuff like that, and I'm like, "What am I getting myself in for?" I told my mother about it. Mama's going, "You will not get arrested."
So, did you ever get arrested when you were doing actions with Deborah? But Deborah was arrested certainly that first time that he talked about, and other times, I presume, was
Oh,
she?
yeah.
Yeah.
She was proud of every one of her arrests, and I know there were over 22.
Wow.
Most of the time, they were like tickets. Yeah, they would ticket everybody, but there was always that chance. And even our Nashville action, when ADAPT came to Nashville before Choices waiver, um, they did take about 10 of our activists to jail. Um, Deborah did not go, but that time she was beginning to use her van at night and things like that. So she didn't feel that an arrest at that time was safe for her. We all agreed. And I had by that time recognized that I have an anxiety disorder, that not claustrophobic to a grand extent, but semi. And you put me in a crowd, especially in a closed in crowd, and I start to get like hyperventilate and get very anxious, to say the least. And so it became quite clear that I was not going to be a frontliner in ADAPT. Because my very first action in San Francisco, I was on the front lines, and the cops decided at the state building, the state officers decided that this tiny little person in her tiny little wheelchair would be easy to get hold of and get out of the crowd. So they picked me up, chair and all, got me about 2 feet off the ground, and realized that the chair and me together weighed considerably more than they thought they would. And he dropped me.
Whoa.
So I landed still in my chair and everything, but it was severe enough to jar me. And I have rheumatoid arthritis. I have juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, which means every joint in my body is affected by this. By that time, I'd had one neck surgery, 2 hip replacements, and was looking at another possible back surgery. And so when I landed so hard, it jarred me emotionally as well as physically, and I lost it. I lost it. And my teammates then pulled one of them, put her whole body over me, and I will never forget that, and told the cops to leave her alone. Leave her alone. You've hurt her. Let us get her out of here. She's hurt. She needs to get out of here. let us get her out of here. And by then, Michael, my significant other, had slid under a couple of other folks and around and put his hand on my foot and ankle to calm me, to give me that extra support to calm me. And it was the most intense thing I'd ever been through. But it was also one of those where you respect the people around you so much that the love just surrounds you. And I had felt it in the march because there were hundreds of adapters on that San Francisco march. And you look ahead and you look behind, and there's nothing but people with disabilities marching together for a cause they believe in. And the emotion that you feel to be part of something like that was just amazing. Something I will never forget and
Thank
never
you.
be ashamed that I was part of, and be proud of it, because it was just an emotion that you'll never feel again. That first time to be part of something like that, it's hard to describe it.
Thank you. Thank you for, I mean, that's a real personal sharing of a deep experience. Thank you for sharing that. Um, I have to ask, were you physically hurt? I mean, being dropped. Did you go to the hospital? I'm just sort of wondering if no. So no medical treatment or stuff, but so folks came in to just basically back the police off from you.
Mhm.
Um,
And they allowed them to clear a path and get me out so that I could move over uh, with the folks that weren't going to get arrested, so I could still cheer them on. And then I went back to the hotel and took a pain pill, but it was so there were quite a few arrests at that action, but you know, uh, everyone respected each other, whether you were arrested or not. I mean, it had been really pushed on us that being arrested is really important, and how much it, meant to the group, and, how once you get the spirit, you're there, that you're just going to want to be arrested. You're going to want to stay the course. And I couldn't. But later on, I was told by some of the leaders in ADAPT that, you know, I showed courage by even being there. I said, "Well, I didn't know I had a panic disorder until you put me in this situation." And I didn't go to another ADAPT action for several years. But then Bob Kafka and Stephanie Thomas, who were, big leaders in ADAPT, came through Memphis to pick up some equipment and stuff and cornered me. Said, "Why haven't you been back?" And I explained what had happened in the action. She went, "I know, but there are all kinds of jobs that you could do without being in the thick of it." And I'm like, "Really? Really? What could?" And she said, "There are things. You come back. We need you." And I became the hamburger girl for the next 5 or 6 actions.
that's that is that's great. Sandy, your story really underscores, and when we talk about advocacy and activism, oftentimes we have something in our mind, and clearly getting arrested was a big piece of what those actions were about. But that really, you really exemplify that there's variety within that advocacy and activism that has to be individualized to the person based on who they are, their experiences, and sort of what kinds of things that are okay for maybe them to be arrested, but other times not necessarily. And
Yeah.
and then being away from it, and then having Bob and Stephanie recognize that and tell you, no, there's more things to do, like Hamburger Girl. That's wow, that's really rich. That's really rich experience. That's a great contributor to our our history of the ADA in Tennessee. It really is. I really appreciate your sharing that intense personal experiences.
We all have stories to tell, and some are Bob and Stephanie stories, who helped shape policy and went to jail and spoke before the legislature and all of those kind of things. And I was more the letter writer and was not good at the phone calls, but I was a great letter writer. And once email came, it's like, yes, I can do this. But it takes everybody learning how to tell their story, learning what their needs are so they can express those. Um, from little bitty, I encourage kids to learn how to talk about their disability. You know, what help do you need? Do you need help fixing a tray in the cafeteria? Do you need help eating your food? Do you need help going to the bathroom? All those things that, may be kind of embarrassing to talk about. But learning how to express it because it's part of you, don't be ashamed of that. Just it's part of your life and you need to know how to tell somebody else about it because you want to participate in everything. And if they don't bring a van with a lift, then you can't go to that play or you can't go see your friends play softball or baseball or you can't get on the field and play. So what makes us us? And be proud of it. Proud.
So, and that's a part of your role in the Independent Living Center is then working with younger folks and the kids as you described just now to help them know how to be in the world and demand their rights in some ways, and you've done that for a number of years.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's my favorite part, really, is talking to others about their disability. Loved my teaching at Partners in Policy Making when I've talked about the history of the ADA and history of independent living and history of disability and how far we've come and how far we've backslid. But, you know, um, doing it with a little humor, a little show and tell, and just being honest and wishing that people had been more so with me as a kid. Um, because I didn't know I was a person with a disability.
Interesting. So yeah, so what would you have, in hindsight, what would you have liked people to do then? In terms of, you said being honest with you.
Um, but see, if I had realized that I had an anxiety disorder, then I would have been more aware of what triggered it and that kind of thing. And it was part and parcel of my arthritis. Um, I knew when I was little bitty in elementary school that for the first 3 years of school, I ate lunch every day in the principal's office with the secretary because I couldn't stand the noise and the all the kids, and I think of an elementary cafeteria. There's tons of kids. They're all talking 90 to nothing. You've got a noise level that's just banging away at this little girl's head. And you're somebody spills their milk and they start crying, and somebody, it's chaos. And this teeny little person's didn't deal with chaos well. But they made accommodations for me. And this was before the 504 was ever passed. Um, but my brothers and sisters had gone through the same elementary school. My sister was taking education at the University of Memphis, and my elementary was located on the campus. But it was a neighborhood school, but it all of the teachers that needed to do their student teaching, we always had multiples of those come through. Jan wasn't allowed to do her student teaching there because, well, I was there. But she did when I was ill. I had a couple of hospitalizations when I was little. And she would come to the school and pick up my books and talk to the teachers about my lesson plans and what I had to do and what were not as critical learning steps at that time. And Jan would come home and we'd work on it in pieces, whatever stamina or energy I had. And so I had my built-in teacher.
Wow. That's great. And the fact that they clearly just made accommodations without the rule of law forcing them.
Right.
That's pretty amazing. That's a great experience. So, where we are, there's been lots of progress in terms of the ADA, and yet we'd still like to see more done. What would the world look like if the promise of the ADA was realized?
People with disabilities would just be part of the community. They'd work, they'd have children, they'd not have to worry about where they got their services and supports from. Um, they could pay a family member to do that and get reimbursed for it. And their family members wouldn't have to give up jobs and livelihoods just to make sure that their child or their spouse had the care they needed. Um, it'd just be life to go to the store and see your friends and your cashier that's working behind the cash register is a person who's sitting on a stool because their crutches are sitting beside them. You just there wouldn't be any barriers per se. You'd be able to go where you wanted to go. You could take public transit and save the environment. You could be part of whatever you wanted to be a part of, and nobody would give you a second glance other than to say, hey, can you serve on this committee? Or you get a call from the mayor a week after you retire, and he says, "Hey, I got a job for you. You won't get paid, but you work your butt off." Okay. It just life would just be life. You know, the pursuit of happiness would be a reality, not pursuit of survival,
Mm,
but a pursuit of happiness.
mm. Thank you. Thank you. I know, and you said something a little bit about this, the threats that we're seeing today to the ADA. And can you speak a little bit to what you see that meaning and what kinds of actions or um, efforts can people with disabilities take as a result of that? I know that's a lot.
Make relationships with your legislators, regardless of what their beliefs are. Tell them your stories, people. Learn your stories. Know what you need. Know what your friends need. Know what uh, changes to the Department of Education are going to mean to your children and your grandchildren. Uh, Golly, that's one of the ones that I fear the most is the destruction of the Department of Education and what that means to uh, the people like us that may need a few accommodations, a few extras that we're having to fight for so hard already. And now what? What does this mean? I mean, the Department of Education gone, the Department of the Administration on Community Living gone. These things that have supported us and given us hope and given us the tools that we needed to live active, inclusive lives. What does that mean to our children with disabilities? My grandchildren with disabilities? How how are they going to continue to get an education, to ask for the things that they need? It's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. We had barely broken the services on home and community-based services, and HHS is taking hits. And, Medicaid is taking hits. And if things continue the way they are, Medicaid will be destroyed. Medicaid's what pays for most of the people with significant disabilities to have personal assistance. Even nursing homes are paid by Medicaid. I mean, Lord help us, I never want to go to one of those places. They're horrible and they're a place you go to die, not to live. But sometimes rehab is necessary for a few weeks. And there are some long-term care that does provide some rehab, some real rehab. Medicaid pays for that. It's it frightens me. Terribly frightens me, especially at this stage of my life where I look down the road, not even probably 3 to 5 years, and I'm gonna need personal assistance. And there are things that, transferring is becoming more and more difficult. Things like washing my hair is becoming more difficult. Things people don't think about, those kind of simple things to anybody who has good upper body strength and movement and those kind of things are not simple for me. And I will have to have someone to help me do those things.
Thank you. Do you, so it is a grim
Mhm.
time. They are grim times. There's no getting around that. But do you see, do you think that because of the ADA, and it's 35 years this year, because of the ADA, have we seen enough progress that people who grew up not knowing anything else but the protections of the ADA and the rights under them, do you think that is going to be helpful in standing up against the threats today?
It will be helpful in some ways, uh, for the leaders that have hired and continue to hire people with disabilities, have made inroads. We're talking big employers, Amazon, Nike, Sephora, many of the larger manufacturing type places, and uh, FedEx, uh, employers that have stepped up to hiring, to making hiring people with disabilities a priority, not a just because it's the right thing to do. They do it with a mandate. They do it as a concentrated effort. I think there's been enough headroads there that even with the demolition of things like vocational rehab and the Department of Education and things like that, there's already enough start, thanks to the ADA, that people will continue to find employment. Still not as at a greater rate as we'd like to see, yes, but at in companies that are already making the effort. Because these kind of cuts are not going to affect who they pay. And the accommodations they're already making are built into their systems now. They've got training programs. They're doing some good things there already. So I think that's a definite thing that all this is not going to stop. I just don't think it'll stop it. It's the old folks like me it'll be in trouble. But our younger people coming up and those that have experienced the uh, positives of the ADA that will, I think they'll continue to receive many of those things because they're just in place. They we've had 35 years. They're there now, and you're not going to come in and just wipe it out at all. People are going to realize that power doors are great for everybody. You know, shoving open doors with packages in your hands to get out is a pain. Uh, but having the handles where they're supposed to be and having the access, it's pretty commonplace. And you just sort of expect it. And even people without disabilities look for that button to help me get into a doorway. I'll spot the button before they do, but they're not real sure what to look for, but they know there should be a button to open that door.
Well, thank you, Sandy. As we wrap up, are there any last thoughts that you want to share?
Regardless of where we are in history, make sure that you speak up for yourself, to stand beside your brothers and sisters, work together to make this world a better place. Be kind to everyone.
Thank you so much.